You take the blue pill, the story ends, you wake up and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Hey, remember when a science fiction movie about simulated reality made every action film that came before it look slightly embarrassed? Released in 1999 by Warner Brothers, The Matrix followed Thomas Anderson, better known as Neo, played as Keanu Reeves, a quiet computer programmer by day and a hacker by night, who discovers that everything around him is a massive simulation built and controlled by machines. Guiding him through that revelation are Morpheus, played by Lawrence Fishburne, and Trinity, played by Carrie and Moss, two rebels who believe that Neo might be the one person capable of ending it. Directed by the Wachowskis, the film blended philosophy, cyberpunk aesthetics, and visual effects that then surprised the whole world and quietly rewired how action movies, visual effects, and internet philosophy will look for the next 20 years. Today, we're going to count down 15 weird facts about The Matrix that you probably never heard of before. And stick around for number 1, because you'll never guess how many cameras and angles it took to get one of the most famous shots in sci-fi history. Before we jump in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. It helps YouTube show this to more retro movie fans like you. Alright, red pill. Let's go. Number 15, the role that nobody in Hollywood actually wanted. Before Keanu Reeves ever touched a black trench coat, the role of Neo was making its way through Hollywood like a rejection letter with legs. The Wachowskis had a pitch that required a very specific kind of faith. Will Smith was first up. The Wachowskis explained bullet time, and something got lost. Smith later admitted that he'd probably messed it up anyway, which is a remarkably polite summary of a man who didn't understand the single most talked about special effect of 1999. Brad Pitt. He simply passed because he was exhausted from 7 years in Tibet, a film that came and went so quietly that his tiredness lasted longer than the movie's buzz. Leonardo DiCaprio had just survived the production chaos of Titanic and wanted nothing to do with another massive effects machine. Nick Cage had family obligations, and Johnny Depp was the Wachowskis' personal first choice, and the studio killed that one before it even had a chance. At a certain point, someone floated the idea of rewriting Neo entirely as a woman and offering the role to Sandra Bullock, but she declined it. And then Keanu Reeves said yes. He learned kung fu, put on the coat, and delivered one of the most defining performances in sci-fi history. Number 14, the set that was built to be destroyed. The lobby shootout needed a set large enough and detailed enough to be progressively demolished, and the production planned every inch of that demolition before a single camera rolled. The production built a massive custom lobby from scratch, marble floors, stone columns, tiled walls, most of it constructed with real materials rather than foam stand-ins, specifically because real materials collapse, crumble, and behave like actual debris when you shoot them. Nearly 4,000 squibs were embedded throughout the set, wired to trigger on cue so that every bullet impact would rip through a column or tear across a wall in real time. When cameras rolled, the set, it started dying, pillars disintegrated, walls shredded, the floor disappeared under a layer of dust and chunks of stone. Resetting between takes meant partial reconstruction, which is why the production planned the sequence so meticulously before anyone fired a single blink. Every mistake didn't just cost a take, it cost time that they'd already spent rebuilding the detail that made it into the final cut anyway. After the shooting stops and the dust begins to settle, a chunk of marble pillar breaks off and hits the floor. It was completely unplanned. The set was simply coming apart on its own timeline. The filmmakers watched it happen and just left it in. A building that had just absorbed 4,000 squibs was allowed to editorialize, and what it had to say made the final cut of one of the most celebrated action sequences of the decade. Number 13, for months of training that beat the cast half to death. Yen Wuing didn't want the job. The legendary Hong Kong fight choreographer behind Drunken Master had no interest in flying to Australia to babysit Hollywood actors through action sequences. So he made demands that he figured would end the conversation, a substantial fee, and a requirement that the entire cast would train in martial arts for 4 months before a single camera rolled. Warner Brothers said yes, without blinking. Suddenly, Keanu Reeves, Karan Moss, and Lawrence Fishburne were reporting to what the cast quietly referred to as Kung Fu School, 9 to 5 every day, stretching and wire work and fight choreography until their bodies had no remaining opinions about anything. Reeves was coming off a major spinal surgery that had been causing partial paralysis in his legs. He spent weeks training in a neck brace, working around the injury as carefully as possible, which is the direct reason that Neo throws far more punches than kicks throughout the first film. Moss twisted her ankle pretty badly during the opening rooftop chase and said nothing. She wrapped it, kept filming, and performed the rest of her action sequences on a damaged ankle because she was convinced that reporting the injury could get her replaced, and given how close Trinity had come to being cast differently, that instinct, it wasn't entirely irrational. But more on that next. Wooing's demands were designed to scare the production off, but instead they produced a cast that could actually fight. Number 12. Trinity had some very famous, almost faces. Now, Karan Moss owned that opening scene so completely that it's hard to picture anyone else in that code, but the casting process, they had other ideas. Jada Pinkett Smith made it deep into consideration. The stunt training clicked, the martial arts prep clicked, and she did a screen test with Keanu Reeves, and well, nothing clicked. By her own account, the chemistry just wasn't really there, which is a significant issue when your two characters are supposed to carry the emotional weight of an entire cyberpunk revolution. The Wachowskis liked her enough that they didn't let her walk away from the franchise entirely. They just wrote her a new character, Niobe, the pilot introduced in the sequels, and brought her back that way, a very graceful consolation prize. Janet Jackson was also a serious contender. At the time, she was in the middle of a massive concert tour, and the filming schedule simply didn't align. So, one of the biggest pop stars on the planet came that close to spending 6 months learning wire fu in Australia. But instead, Carrie Moss got the role, a relatively unknown actress who walked into that audition, did something that producers hadn't seen yet, and walked out as Trinity. The Wachowskis spent months looking for the right person to stand next to Neo. The right person had been available the whole time. Number 11. They spent the entire test budget on 10 minutes. Warner Brothers, well, they didn't hand the Wachowskis a blank check. The studio approved roughly $10 million, enough to get started, and a very clear message that they need to see results before anyone signed off on the rest. The Wachowskis took that 10 mil and spent nearly all of it on the first 10 minutes of the film, the opening, Trinity fighting her way out of a hotel, kicking a cop across a room, sprinting across rooftops with agents on her heels. That sequence absorbed almost the entire test budget because it had to. Everything had to work together while looking convincing, custom camera rigs, training for the cast, the technical groundwork to make bullet time function as an actual filmmaking tool rather than just a theory on a storyboard. So they screened the finished sequence for Warner Brothers executives, and the response was immediate. The remaining budget got approved, eventually bringing the total north of $60 million. The entire film's financial future rode on 10 minutes of footage, and those 10 minutes delivered so completely that the conversation was essentially over before anyone finished their coffee. Number 10. The code running in the simulation is actually a dinner menu. The digital rain is one of the most recognizable images in modern cinema, cascading green symbols flooding down dark screens, representing the underlying code of an entire simulated reality. Hackers, philosophers, and film students alike all spent years treating it like a sacred text. It's actually sushi recipes.
Yeah.
Visual effects artist Simon Whitley was tasked with designing something that felt simultaneously technical and organic, code that looked alive rather than clinical. After struggling to land on the right aesthetic, he turned to Japanese cookbooks belonging to his wife. He scanned katakana characters directly from the recipe pages, and then he flipped them, mirrored them, and stylized them until they read as something genuinely alien. A handful of Western numerals got mixed in two to complete the effect. The result looked like the visual language of a superior machine civilization, but it actually was just instructions for preparing rice. The Wachowskis spent months building philosophical depth into every corner of the film, the Greek mythology, the Baudrillard, the Chicago street names, the symbolism layered into every character's name and ship and choice, the visual representation of their entire constructed universe, the thing the audiences stare at during every transition and every hacker sequence. Well, it all turned out to be just someone's favorite roll order. Whiteley had confirmed it publicly and seemed to find the whole thing pretty amusing. The Matrix is a simulation and the code running it, well, he'd like to know if you want the salmon roll or the spicy tuna. Number 9. The film color-coded reality. Now, the Wachowskis made a secret color system look almost inevitable in the movie. Everything inside the Matrix is green, not subtly green. The walls, the lighting, the air itself, it all carries a green cast that sits just slightly wrong without most audiences ever consciously registering why. The reference point was old monochrome computer monitors. The association was pretty deliberate too. The Matrix was supposed to feel like a display, like the audience was watching life rendered on a screen rather than lived in a world. The real world runs blue. Every scene aboard the Nebuchadnezzar, every moment in the ravaged machine-controlled future outside the simulation is cold and desaturated and lit in hard blue tones, harsher than the Matrix, less comfortable, more honest. This wasn't applied after the fact with color filter. The production built it into the physical sets. Lights were gelled, fabrics dyed, paint choices were made with the palette in mind. The color scheme existed in the rooms before cameras entered them. So while audiences tracked the plot through dialogue and action, the film was running a second, quieter track underneath, a visual system that answered the location question before any character did. Green meant the machine was in control. Blue meant someone had gotten out. And the rabbit hole just keeps going.